Hello and welcome to Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel, independent and impartial. This is where we take a look inside the world of media, analysing the trends, the issues and the reporting of some of the week's top stories. I'm Peter Ndoro, and this is what's coming up on the show today. There was a summit to amplify the voices of women around the world which took place this past week, and we'll be talking to one of the hosts to find out a little bit more about this initiative. In our News and History feature this week, we take you back to 2003 when a popular musician was released from prison, and I wonder if you can guess who that artist was. We'll find out a little bit later on the show. And also on the program, we'll be taking a look at media in general and shocking revelations at the Zondo Commission this week, suggesting that the State Security Agency may have paid media houses to write good news. We'll get to the bottom of that as well. But remember, you can engage with us on social media using the Twitter handle, #SABC Media Monitor, and you can also share your views with us via WhatsApp, and that number is 065 862 4548. That's 065 862 4548. Now, before we get into our highlighted stories on the program, let's first take a look at what's on the front pages of the Sunday newspapers this morning. Well, the Sunday Times is leading with a story they describe as the Hawks SANDF in a Cuban drugs standoff. It appears that guns have been drawn as the military defended smuggled medication from being seized. The papers reporting the Hawks were sent packing after an embarrassing standoff with the SANDF's military police during a bungled raid to confiscate these controversial Cuban drugs that were stored at the South African Military Health Services. The City Press front page story describes the shockwave that has ripped through the State Security Agency. The State Security Agency has been exposed following dramatic revelations at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry into State Capture, all about the organization's weaknesses. The papers reporting that insiders spoke about a shockwave that has struck the agency, including fear that foreign agencies could seize the moment to infiltrate and recruit disgruntled members for their own national security interests. The Sunday Independent is leading with a story about how, following revelations at the Zondo Commission of Inquiry, how State Security Agency funds were abused for political purposes. A lawyer representing some of those implicated, though, says that the Zondo Commission misled them, duping the lawyer into believing that his clients wouldn't be implicated and named and shamed by witnesses chosen to appear before the commission. The lawyer insists that his clients should have been given a Rule 3.3 notice warning that they would be named. The Sunday Tribune has gone with a story of a Durban woman, Carmela Govender, who has managed to get the court to decide that her late husband should not have made his family the sole beneficiaries of some of his investments when he passed away, to her exclusion. She argued in court that she was entitled to half of her husband's estate as they were married in community of property, even though he had changed the beneficiary list without her knowledge, leaving 6 million rand to 5 other people except her, and they've been married 22 years. The Weekend Argus on Sunday is leading with a story saying that statistics released by the South African Medical Research Council of excess mortality indicate that more than 120,000 people may have likely died of COVID-19 in South Africa since last May, which is 3 times higher than the official figure, which is around 43,000 recorded so far. The Medical Research Council says that the number of extra deaths over and above what is normally expected was very high between December and January, and that timing corresponds closely with the COVID-19 pandemic. And finally, the Sunday World is leading with a story about the ANC's Provincial Executive Committee in Gauteng that has dismissed a motion by supporters of Premier David Makhura to reinstate former Health MEC Bandile Masuku and President Cyril Ramaphosa's spokesperson Khusela Diko back into the committee. Masuku and Diko were instructed by the Provincial Integrity Committee to step aside following their implication in a procurement of PPE scandal. All right, so those are your Sunday papers. We'll be taking a look at those a little bit later on in the program. But right now, we're going to take a look at what's trending on social media. Yeah, because a lot of you, this is where you get most of your information. Now, these change quite a bit over time, but as you can see, Scripture Challenge, Sacred Space, Blessed Sunday, these are the usual stories that we see every Sunday. But the one that really grabbed my attention is number 3, We Appreciate Makadzi. And I think the story is she had been trolled for some reason by people on social media, and so a lot of people have started to show their appreciation and sending their messages saying that thank you for giving us 2 classic albums back to back. If she does it'll be a hat trick. So a lot of people really fighting back on her behalf. You're a queen and that's it. We appreciate Makadzi. And yeah, they're the most beautiful queen, humble and sweet. This woman is an inspiration. She's very beautiful. Let's appreciate her. And all right, and there we go. She gives us the best music and the best stage performance. We appreciate her. She is us. All right, so yeah, it's a bit sad that some people would troll and make all sorts of comments on social media. But there you go. People love her and are busy showing their appreciation. All right, we have quite a bit after the break. Is the media in collapse? And also a very special conference that was held this week in South Africa and around the world about giving women a voice. Stay with us for that and more. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor on the SABC News Channel. Now, the South African media industry was hit by yet another scandal this past week. The admission of the African News Agency CEO, Vasantha Angamuthu, that the ANA had accepted money from the State Security Agency. The funds were meant to provide multimedia training for the SSA analysts and interns across Africa, as well as to carry positive stories about South Africa and the government. Angamuthu's admission follows a testimony of the former chairperson of the high-level panel review into the agency, Sydney Mufamadi, before the State Capture Commission, that about 20 million rand was paid by the intelligence agency to ANA to influence the national news narrative and to counter some of the bad publicity around former President Jacob Zuma and his government. Let's listen in to former Minister Mufamadi.
There was bad publicity in the country, within the country and beyond, about the country, about the president and about the SSA, which then necessitated this infiltration and influencing of the media. So they say the project was launched in the 2015-2016 financial year with a budget of 24 million rand. And they say one of the largest amounts issued for this project was 20 million rand given to a media agency, apparently therefore for services rendered for 8 months.
Yes, it was originally intended that the name of the agency would be redacted, but you've had discussions with the SSA in that regard, and it's not necessary to redact the name. What is the name of the agency?
The agency, we were told, is Africa News Agency.
The press code is quite clear in terms of how media organizations should avoid being influenced by commercial and also political interests and where they are seen to be pushing particular agendas. It's quite clear that we should avoid that at all times.
All right, okay, so quite startling revelations made this past week. Well, I'm now joined by Makudu Sivara, who's the editor at Times Live, and Joe Mhlanga, who's the editor of Behind the News Network. Gentlemen, thanks very much indeed for joining me. I was shocked this past week, just when I thought that, you know, past revelations were perhaps as much as we're going to see. It looks like this coming week and coming weeks, we're going to hear even more. But let me start with you, Makudu. Your initial reaction to the revelations that came through, and if it surprised you, why?
Yeah, good morning. Good morning, Peter, and the viewers. It was surprising for me because, you know, under or when you deal with matters of this nature, you would expect that there would be a journalist somewhere who becomes rogue and who goes against what the media house stands for. And so in this case, when the revelation was that, you know, the entire organization agreed to work with the SSA, and there was a budget which then, you know, brings in commercial considerations. There was a budget that they were working with, and you know, I mean, if you look at what the ANA chief executive says, that, you know, they were going to train people with multimedia, and of course, all that brings to the forth quite a number of other questions. And if people were doing multimedia, where was this tender advertised? Is a newspaper house the best of all institutions and companies in the country to provide that kind of multimedia training for spooks? And it's just traveling on many respects.
All right, okay, so those are your first thoughts. Joe, what are your first thoughts when you heard about 20 million rand? I was trying to think under what circumstances could it have been possible to get this kind of funding from government?
Good morning, Peter, and good morning to our viewers. For me, honestly, I was not surprised. How so? Historically, when we look at the media and the founding fathers of media houses, in most cases, they wanted to communicate a certain message to a certain group of people to drive a certain narrative and the perception on how they want people to perceive a particular agenda. So that will also be done through state agencies, state organs. So the fact that this came out, it was one of many. It happens across the world. That's how the system works. It's unfortunate that this had to come out. But for me, it was not any of surprise at all. This is just the tip of the iceberg. There's many things that are happening in the background that we don't even get to hear about. So for me, I understand we need to question the ownership of these media houses. We need to check the relationship of the government officials or the presidency with some of these media houses. In some countries, it's direct. You have Fox News that will shoot straight and support a particular president. You have the CNN. It becomes a circus. It becomes a show. But that is giving us the gist of what is actually happening in the media. In the perfect world, you'll expect media to report, to inform, to alert the community, the citizens, so that they can know what is happening in their country. But in the actual fact, it's not. The whole entire thing is to push, is to make people think of what the people, the editors, are mandated to do. So we must not make media to be like it's perfect. Why do we have different kinds of headlines? Because different kinds of agendas are being pushed. So for me, I was not surprised at all. In fact, the 20 million that is there, it's a list of what has been spent. This is just one administration. What about the other administration? What are the terms of reference of this investigation that Mr. Mfamadi did? So are we talking about 20 million only for this 2015 or 2016? What about the administration before? And we can stretch it back. This, Peter, will tell you that why FW de Klerk was a journalist in the first place, why Helen Zille was a journalist. The idea was for them to communicate whatever message that they wanted, to spend whatever money that is there for them. This is something that just came out for us to now start to see that some of us have been suspicious of how some media houses are operating, and the point has been proven.
Okay. Makudu, were you surprised that Angamutu actually admitted and almost sounded as if there was nothing wrong with this transaction? Is there any circumstances under which a state security agency could give money to a newspaper? Let's explore that first. I mean, is it completely off, or could it be if, let's say, the newspaper admitted that they received money and that all the reports may be, as long as there's full disclosure, could that work, or you must never get money from government?
Well, I mean, it will undermine the relationship of trust that must exist between the people who publish a particular newspaper or people who own a particular media house and audiences or readers of the particular newspaper, because the premise is that, and this is what the Press Council actually calls for, that the media must be accurate, it must be truthful, and it must be factual, and that where there seems to be an agenda, which I wanted to say my learned colleague, which my learned colleague is averring or is talking to, those must be exposed. And I mean, I don't want just to veer off your question a little bit. I don't want to debate conspiracy theories and things that have not been proven. I want to stick to the facts, and the fact is that we now have African News Agency, which has been given 20 million, and it confirms that it has been given 20 million. If there are others who have received something, whether they are individuals, whether they are specific newspapers or media houses, my learned colleague will announce who they are, how much they got, and for what, and then we will deal with the specifics, because the problem of theories and conspiracies and generalities is that we tend to close this in terms of this is what has happened in history, this is what has happened in many countries across the world. We know this is what politicians want. Politicians want everything as far as I'm concerned. And politicians want analysts too, to say, you go on that platform and provide a particular level or a slant in analysis. Yeah. They want everything. But the thing that we can stick to, and the thing that can be verified, is what is a fact out of what is being communicated. And back to your question, it did concern me that when the African Eye News Agency released a statement, they behaved as if it's okay for them to be doing tenders with an organization like the State Security Agency, right? Which is problematic on its own. But further, they then admit, and this is what Dr. Mfamadi was saying. We're concerned about a particular narrative that is coming out of the media about President Zuma. And the intention was for, the state security agency and the particular media house to then come up with a positive news report. That on its own, again, is very problematic. No media house must say, we've received money, and so therefore here's positive coverage. That's no longer news. That's advertising, and that's problematic. That they, and this is the point that I was making earlier when I said I was surprised that they would go get the money and then agree. Number one, commercial considerations are influencing editorial. That's a problem. And that number two, even in the editorial, they are saying, let's go and do positive stories about you. A media house must never be in a position where it makes promises like that to anybody, whether it's the SSA, whether it's a political party, or whether it's a private company. That can never be done or should never be done. It should not be countenanced. And where there's evidence of something like that happens, there should be consequences for it. There must be accountability.
So, Joe, let me ask you this. Is it the fact that it was government, state security agency, handing out taxpayers' money makes it deplorable? Would it be different had it been a private company paying ANA to write positive stories? Because, I think newspapers, as long as you know where they stand, you should make up your mind. You know that the Guardian is going to write about Labour and it'll be positive. The Times is going to write about the Conservative Party and be positive. Fox is pro-Republican. Maybe that's a natural evolution, that private media can do whatever it wants. So would it have been a different story for you had the money to ANA come from the private sector?
Again, it would have led into you looking at what is that private company going to benefit from the government, since now it looks like they are proxy. Right. It will again, we will have to dig deep that what is the main cause for them to fund that organization to write positive about the state. So that will mean now there is an agenda that private company will be pushing. So it will also be problematic. But before I go on, we have a journalist that back then, Bulela Ngcuka called a press conference with editors, and he had a discussion that was said to be an off-the-record discussion. And at that time, City Press editor, I think it was Busmona, he wrote the story. Ranjane wrote the story, and then it was published. And then Busmona was into trouble for taking something that was off the record. And since then, we have noticed that, again, she was mentioned in the state capture inquiry at Zondo Commission that she was paid by SSA. But where is she now, Peter? What is happening now? Where is the conspiracy theories of where she is now? As I said, these are things that happen. And this is one of many things that happen. So now, if it's a conspiracy theory, where is she working now? Which office? I'm not going to mention the office where she's working. She has been fingered in the Zondo Commission. It's in the public knowledge. And we all know where she's working. So my point was not just thumb stuck. I'm talking about the fact that my brother knows where she's working. So these are some of the things that my point was that if we talk about exposing the people that have been involved, the commission has already fingered on one journalist that is now working in the government. So what does it mean, Peter? That's the biggest concern, that we should be looking at those things. So the other guys have admitted, act arrogantly as if nothing happened. But on the other hand, we have somebody who has been fingered, who is now being accommodated in the government. So what is going on? Why is one treated different than the other? That's my question.
Yeah,
right.
can we
Yeah.
deal with that, Peter?
Yeah.
Because I don't want us to make assumptions and say, let the reader connect the dots. We are here. If we have facts, we must put the facts on the table and be very clear about what accusations we're making. So if Ranjeni works for City Press and she writes a story works for Sunday Times and then writes a story for City Press and Vosimona publishes it, the Sunday Times, those many years ago, took a correct decision to throw her out of the newsroom. She was thrown out of the Sunday Times. Now, if she now works for government, what does it mean? Does it mean that because she was paid for a particular car breakdown on the instruction of a crime intelligence head, that therefore, and this is a big leap. This is a thing that I need an explanation about. So therefore, the stories that she did before the ethical issue about her writing for a rival organization came up, about a story involving the former NDPP head allegedly having been a spy or
All right.
not.
You know what? We're running out of time. But I think you've made your point. Joe, 30 seconds. Is media in trouble in general, or must we just keep looking at and saying there's there's a few bad apples, but generally the media is okay? What are your thoughts? 30 seconds.
Should I go?
Yeah.
Okay. For me, Peter, it's always been, the media is always pushing an agenda. The media is in trouble because there's so much that we are doing wrong where we should be doing right. So it's time for us to go back and reflect on how we can try and get what we were mandated to do, to get it right.
All right.
But it's going to be very difficult because there's a lot of funding involved. So people go where the money is going. So it's basically it's a mess.
Okay, so it's a mess for you. Makudu, 30 seconds.
It's a contested space. And we have been reflecting, and where bad apples appear, we throw them out. That's what is required. And that's what
the media
industries
generally is fine. Okay, gents, we're going to talk again later when we look at the papers. Thanks very much indeed for your thoughts on this very contentious issue. And you at home can make up your mind. What we've heard, does that cast aspersions on media in general, or is it just a few bad apples? We'll have more for you after the break, and this time we'll be taking a look at women's voice in the media. All right, back to Media Monitor and what's happening right now. A global virtual summit called Claiming Our Stories, Raising Our Voices took place last week, Thursday. The conference was targeted at, but not exclusively, to young women and gender non-conforming people in journalism, advocacy, communications, social media and leadership, with almost 40 women leaders from more than 20 countries. It sought to introduce women in the global south to their counterparts across the globe and encourage learning and sharing in 2021 under the themes, various themes, including using social media for change. Well, to tell us a little bit more about this, I'm now joined by the conference, joined by CEO at Frey Intermedia, Paula Frey. Paula, always good to talk to you. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and welcome to the program.
Good morning, Peter. It's good to be here.
All right, so more than 20 countries. So this is an international issue, international questions that you were raising. What inspired this conference, and what were you really trying to get out of it?
Yeah, 2020 had been such a difficult year, I think, not just for journalism, but also for women in leadership, with a lot of difficulties around misinformation, disinformation, but also pushback generally on women leadership. And I think we were inspired by then candidate, Vice President candidate Kamala Harris, when she was doing the debate with Mike Pence, and trying to make a point, and he kept on interrupting her, and she had to push back and say, I'm speaking. And we really wanted to create a platform that would help women reset, refresh, and re-energize for the year ahead, but also to give some insights and share some insights with women from the Global South on how to actually get their voices across, how to be able to stand up and say, I'm speaking. And in the end, Peter, we actually had 47 women leaders from 34 countries, and the conference followed the sun. So we started off in the East and came across the globe over to Africa, and then ended up with a very, very strong representation of women from South America, sharing some incredible insights of how women could claim their stories and essentially raise their voices in 2021.
All right, so what are some of the challenges that females in these sectors, media and communications in general, have been facing across the globe?
So I think one of the big issues really has been that the disruption of the COVID experience, but also, I mean, there's a lot of research that shows that there's been a disproportionate impact of lockdowns around the globe on women in general, women having to take a larger part of the burden of care at home, women more likely to have been retrenched or furloughed or had their positions cut. So on the one hand, there's that issue to look at. On the other hand, there are really issues that everyone is facing in terms of how you communicate in this era, how you can use social media for change, how we find different ways of being able to tell our stories effectively, but also, some of the themes looked at how we can use technology in order to grow community. How do we operate in a virtual world when offices are virtual, when communities are virtual, and then find ending off on the day with communication and in leadership. And even the format of the conference itself, Peter, was an exercise in innovation. It was a 12-hour-long conference. It was designed so that women could come in and leave. It was being told on multiple platforms. So it was the conference was based on Zoom, but we were also testing different formats on different social media platforms. And even now, we've put the conference itself, all of the sessions online, and beginning to see what the lessons are in terms of how people interact with the information afterwards.
All right. I noticed that you were targeting younger women in general. Why was that? Is it because they're the most vulnerable, or is it about looking to the future?
I think it's a combination. I mean, the actual speaker profile is fairly mixed, but with a kind of slant to more younger women. But I think also because I think that there is a lot that we can learn from the younger generation, and very often we're privileging experience when we're asking people to speak, when in fact we're in such a disruptive place right now that we really need to be listening to everyone as much as possible. And I mean, and some of the panels, for example, I was really privileged to be able to moderate a panel on new ways of using social media for storytelling. And we had panelists from Myanmar, from Malaysia, from Cameroon, and really that interaction, that global interaction, just really reinforces. They were all young women, and the interaction really shows we have so much to learn from one another. More of these interactions would really allow women from South America, from Africa, from Asia to be able to share and use those lessons to improve the way we tell our stories.
All right. And, this thing about what you said, Kamala Harris having to say, I'm trying to say something, can I speak? I do find that there are certain cultural settings where women can often be treated like children in the house, and they're only allowed to speak when they're allowed to speak. And I just wonder if is something, a thread that you are seeing as well, that societal nuances influence the way that women can or are allowed to work. I mean, there are some countries women can't even drive.
Yeah, so it's fascinating because one of the panels that we were looking at using technology for change, for innovation, we had panelists from Guatemala, from Jordan, from Pakistan, and from India. And one of the things that came out was quite interesting. A lot of the panelists work with women in teaching them how to use the technology. And they very often had to design those programs around women's access to technology. And very often it was after hours when husbands came home with the cell phone that has access to the internet that such training could be done. And so we were finding that there were a lot of common lessons. I mean, in the story about how to diversify our stories, we had a speaker, the head of the Native American Journalists Association in America, and then the executive director of Africa No Filter here in Africa. And the commonalities between getting our stories heard and defining how our stories are framed were really quite stark. And it was the first time really thinking about how invisible stories of Native Americans are in mainstream media in America. And then when they are visible, how they are often distorted in terms of the stereotypes they portrayed. And then very often what somebody like Africa No Filter is trying to do in terms of changing the tropes or challenging the tropes about Africa in mainstream media just generally. So lots of commonalities, lots of things to learn. And it was really, really fascinating.
All right, another one that fascinated me is using social media for change. There's no question social media for me, I think, has been one of the big game changers in terms of mass communication, but it does have its challenges as well in terms of, we've seen in countries like Egypt, women being arrested and jailed for tweets. And also this online cyberbullying that happens on social media. How do you navigate this tool?
And that is such a critical issue. I mean, the first part of the conference really looked at how you use social media for change, and a huge component about it was actually social media safety. And so we had expert presentations on how you look after yourself online. I mean, the reality is that social media is a powerful tool. It is also a tool where women are most likely to be bullied, to be harassed, and that harassment is often quite sexual in nature. And so for a lot of our speakers, it was, how do you encourage women to use social media, but then how do you make sure that they also have the skills to be able to protect themselves online? And so we were very, very privileged to have a cybersecurity expert actually do one of the presentations to just give some really basic steps, like two-step authentication, just looking after yourself online, making sure that when you're going online, that you're taking the right precautions. So I think it's quite clear that women have to engage online, but we also need to know enough to be able to take precautions and to know when the online harassment has real threats for offline.
All right, and then perhaps finally, new ways of telling stories. Does this talk about distribution in terms of how you get the stories out, or is there genuinely new ways to tell a story, and what might that be?
So, Peter, I'm someone who loves to find out about storytelling and different ways of telling storytelling. But I was amazed at what was happening across the globe. I mean, some of the examples that were being shared by Adila Razak from Malaysia, Kini, for example, about the way they've been using data visualization, but also things like the audiogram. So really a range of things on a very, very practical level, the rise of explanatory journalism, the rise of solutions journalism. So that's the way we actually put our stories together, but then also the way you can tell your stories on different platforms. So things like the audiogram that you can then disseminate on platforms like Telegram, WhatsApp, Viber, Signal, etc. The different formats of stories, using infographics, using different. One of the examples of new ways of telling stories was also just kind of getting readers to answer questions, so you can get a sense of what people are talking about, what people are thinking about, what is the mood of your audience. absolutely fascinating things. People are really out there experimenting with storytelling and taking the platforms and not just kind of cut and pasting from one platform to the other, but looking at what works best for different platforms and then telling the stories in new, interesting ways. One thing that stands out that I'd like to share is that everyone is saying, make it shorter, make it sharper, make it shareable.
Oh, it's fascinating how things have changed over time. In our lifetime, it used to be that you had a pen and paper and a camera, and that was it. But as you say, things have changed so much. Paula, always great talking to you. We look forward to chatting to you again soon.
Great. Thanks so much, Peter.
All right, that's Paula Frey, who's the CEO of Frey Intermedia, talking about the role of women, particularly young women, in journalism, media and communications generally, and the challenges that they're facing at this time. Right, we're going to take you back in history after the break, and we find an interesting story for you, which reminded me of something, but we'll share that with you just after this. Welcome back. You're still watching Media Monitor. Now, on January the 22nd, Malawian officers assaulted the Telegraph and BBC Africa Eye correspondent Henry Mango in Lilongwe. Mango was in the process of gathering information for an assignment on COVID-19 interventions in Malawi when he met the assaulters. The officers were at Bwalo la Njobvu for COVID-19 restrictions enforcement. Mango asked one of the officers to direct him to a senior officer for permission to take pictures of the police photographing them enforcing COVID-19 regulations, but instead was assaulted by the police. Egyptian authorities have arrested a cartoonist on Monday who posted a video tribute to the country's 2011 uprising on the 10th anniversary of the first mass protests, two security sources have said. Now, the cartoonist Ashraf Hamdi was detained early in the morning from his home for investigation on charges of misusing social media sites and spreading false news. And that's according to sources. Egypt has arrested the cartoonist after publishing Arab Spring Anniversary. All right, time now for us to go to one of my favourite sections on the programme, and that's when we jump into our news archives, take you back in time. And this week we go back to the 28th of November 2003, when the people's poet Mzwakhe Mbuli was released on parole from Leeuwkop Medium Sea prison. Mbuli had been arrested in October 1997 and sentenced to 13 years in prison after he was found guilty on charges relating to a bank robbery. This is how the SABC covered the story.
Mzwakhe Mbuli, the people's poet and convicted bank robber, is free. Mbuli was released from Leeuwkop prison north of Johannesburg this morning after 6 years behind bars.
The people's poet is free. Everyone from well-wishers to Winnie Madikizela Mandela. He may have been locked away 6 years, but he clearly hasn't lost his poetic touch.
God sustains, I am unsinkable.
Yes, people keep on saying Mzwakhe is a criminal, but I don't believe.
From Leeuwkop prison, it was off to the Johannesburg Correctional Services office, then to Newtown.
I was wrongfully incarcerated, and I maintain my innocence until this day. Stay tuned for my new, exciting, mind-blowing, captivating, creative material.
For now, Mbuli will be making frequent visits to his parole officer, and he also plans to revive his music career. Janji Chauke, SABC, Johannesburg.
Yeah, still loved by millions across the country. Well, it's time now for us to jump into a look at our newspapers, actually, and we're joined by our editors that we were speaking to a little bit earlier on. Makudu and Joe, good to see you again. Right, let me start with you, Joe, this time. Which paper and which story grabbed your attention?
Peter, it's City Press. The shockwave rips through SSA. To me, that's the biggest news. That's where I want to focus on. And of which I have few papers, Sunday Times, but this is one that stood out for me.
All right, tell me why. Why is it something that we really need to be worried about?
The sensitivity of state information, it's now being discussed in the public domain where the whole world is watching. So there are certain things that should have been discussed in a different platform, but I'm not sure because it's now being discussed in the commission, and as it's being discussed like this, in the next couple of days, slowly the names of people are being dropped, and it looks like we're not worried about the safety of our information and the people that are working within the system. So I agree with the story that this might usher a way for outside, mostly the Western countries that will have an interest in our country, that will come after the disgruntled members of these services. So that is a serious concern for me.
All right, so what about you, Makuru? What paper and what story grabbed your attention the most?
Well, two things.
Yeah.
Firstly, the story that Joe is talking about what happened at the state capture. It is an important story. It is a story that is also very well captured in the Sunday Times. There's a news piece and the editor has written a column about it, and a number of other people are looking at exactly the implications that Joe is talking about. That where at one level we want these things to come out in the open, that people who have been doing wrong things, those things must not be covered simply by invoking national security, that they must face the consequences of their actions. And where I disagree slightly with Joe is that, not all names must be held back. We must respect state security, but some names must be dropped. We need to know who these people are, who got the cash, etc., etc. But the second story for me is the lead in the Sunday Times this morning, which is a story about the Hawks and the SANDF engaged in a standoff with guns being taken out. I mean, it reminds us of what happened when the Hawks went to President Zuma and there was the VIP protection, guns out. It's dramatic stuff.
Yeah.
And the thing behind the drama of this week is because the SANDF went to Cuba and procured medication that's not approved for use in our country and spent 200 million using a code for training and not being transparent about this being drugs that they are procuring from Cuba. And now there's a situation and the Hawks are investigating, and the Hawks are saying, we need access to the evidence. And the soldiers are saying, hey, you have no
It's a shocking story. I wish we could talk much longer on it, but people can grab those newspapers. To both of you, thanks so much indeed for joining us. And I'm very glad that both of you have not received a Rule 3.3 letter from the Zondo Commission. Thanks so much indeed. Take care. And that's how we come to the end of this week's show. Thanks so much indeed for joining us, and we'll see you next week. In the meantime, please observe the Zondo the protocols on COVID-19. Protect yourself and protect each other. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.